In a poll of 14,000 leaders, what emerged as the most important leadership capability? Was it strategic thinking, decisiveness, pragmatism? Well, depending on how much you've adopted a human-centered approach, you may or may not be surprised to hear that it's empathy. And we couldn't agree more. So, why is empathy such an important capability for leaders? And how can leaders work on their ability to empathise with others? I invited one of our consultants, Damiao Lo, to discuss this with me. So, Damiao, thank you for joining me today. How are you? How are you feeling?
Good, excited, and ready to share and bounce ideas with you.
Great. Well, thank you ever so much for joining me on today's episode. Before we get into today's topic, which is all around empathy, why don't we give our audience the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better? So why don't you tell us about yourself in 60 seconds?
Okay, all right. I was born in Macau, and I grew up in Canada for 25 years. My background was IT management, and that career in Canada really got me stuck on how leading team it's important, and how create empathy to understand where they're coming from, really motivate and influence them to help them grow and achieve their goals that I want them to. And so when I moved from Canada to Shanghai in 2007, I immersed more into the topics of leadership. So I was involved with MBA school, leading EMBA students, and help them how to create a path forward so they can do work as well as academic life together. And through that, I started doing more and more business engagement for leadership development. And that really got me into my own leadership journey, going through a 9 months leadership course to understand what leadership means. So I have an executive coach and support me and help me to grow. And so I think that that really anchored me to how I met Impact in 2015, and I started working with Impact, doing leadership development, coaching, as well as doing other client engagements. So that's where I'm coming from.
Great. Well, we're going to dive into that wealth of knowledge and experience that you have. So let's start with the big question. What is empathy?
For me, it's like, from my own perspective, it's about how to create that capacity to understand where other people's viewpoint and intentions are coming from. Because if not, then we really don't create that connections or create that relationship. And based on my own observations when I was working in Canada, leading a team, that really got me thinking to start. It's like, what exactly is that topic? And I was younger back then, and so I was always driven, not hearing what people are thinking, or what would they want to get out of the project they're working with me. And finally, after a 9 months long project that I was on, it really hit home. That really got me into thinking about what empathy is. It's like, let's pause and find out, to understand where peoples are coming from, what their current circumstances, as well as what their purpose in the work that they're doing, as well as what are their concerns, so that I can hear them, and then how to address it in a way that they can hear me better, so that they said, oh, I hear, oh, so you hear me first, you understand where I'm coming from. Okay, so now how do we actually build that rapport to actually accelerate it, to build that relationship? That really helped.
So maybe it might be helpful to expand on this sort of description of what empathy is with maybe a real world example. Can we maybe provide a bit of an example of where? An example to help illustrate what you just said.
Yeah. So the most impactful one that got me really thinking about that perspective was actually still in Canada, working in this project that I'm working on. And I was working with the network people, and they were overloaded with requests and basically overwork. And me, my own pressure of meeting the objectives with a short timeline, I keep sending them email, keep phoning them, and asking them to do a lot of requests. And finally, I think it was one too many requests on that day, and it just blew up. So the person wrote a really nasty email to everyone, blanketing all the way to the IT VP and the client group.
Yeah.
And so it's like, hey, you cannot do this, da, 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 da. And it's really basically everything that been simmering inside him was totally just blew up. And at that time, I when I read it, if I did not have what we call the empathy, I would actually immediately roll back and say, this is your job, go do it. But then I actually pause and think about what was going on in him that really got him to start writing this email. Yeah. So what I ended up doing was I waited for about 12 hours before I respond. And when I respond, I addressed what his current situation and his concerns of my request, as well as I I list out two most impactful solutions that he did for me, the reason how he did it, and that is the reason why I asked him for this request. And because of that, it really allowed him a graceful exit from that heated email that nobody know how to de-escalate. So by me putting myself into the shoes, understanding it, acknowledge my overbearing, so to speak, requests, and then putting some examples of how he helped me in the past, not just me but the client and the project, it really put him into a positive light and demonstrated how important he is for the organization as we're moving forward. And so that really helped. And that was when I hit on and say, oh, wow, like everyone is always have something going on with them. And if we don't create that space from ourselves that we can control and hold that space and help others, then there's no relationship building, and it'll be always conflict and stress. So that's really hit home, and that's what got me thinking about that.
And we hear so much, especially these days, about burnout and how people are focusing more on jobs and roles where that balance is, that the work-life balance, it's becoming more life-work balance, isn't it? Like it's where life comes first more than work. And so from a leader perspective, what role would you say does empathy play in that leadership toolkit?
I think now more and more it's important. For me, I might not use the word empathy. I would always just say that how to create that space for me to be curious and understand where people are coming up, where are they coming up. And if I can do that, then it really create myself into a mode of wanting to understand. So for me, more important is to create that empathy. It's a result of action that I myself do. One would be, what am I curious about? Am I willing to learn something every day? Am I willing to learn from this person? And then it's like, after that is, what's the next step? What can we do, collaborate together to create some value that's higher than what this person can do. So that's what I would be coming from is empathy. It's kind of the end result of some of the actions that we do.
And I think what's interesting is that as soon as you start to pay attention to thinking outside of other than yourself and start thinking about other people, you start to see an even bigger picture, because it can, first of all, you might start with the other members in your team, but then you might start thinking about members in your organization globally, and how that might have, I know that we've started doing far more of that over the past few years, where we, particularly when it comes to talking to the whole organization, we start going, does this language land with our colleagues in ASPAC region? Does it, it starts to, you start to have a much, your work, your mindset opens up massively. So in terms of to get to stages like that, what would you say, how can leaders develop their ability to be empathetic?
Before I answer that questions, I want to add on to it is to follow up that questions you asked about the
Mm,
toolkits.
mm,
I would, in what I'm seeing the last year was a lot of discussions about how to deal with Gen Z. And
mm,
I think that that in itself, if we can create that understanding, to create that empathy when they exhibit some behavior that not to our expectations, we should actually pause ourselves and then say, hey, well, how can we contribute to their learning? Because in the end, they still want to learn something. So
mm,
I think that this, when you're asking the questions about what role does empathy play in the leadership toolkits, then in the next couple of years, it should be more and more because we have more Gen Z and more younger people coming in. And how do we actually
mm.
create that space to allow them to grow and for us to actually help them?
Yeah, that's really
Yeah.
interesting, and you're absolutely right. But and I guess, yeah, being somewhere in the middle as well, of course, that there's empathy. You you might think of the mindsets of both the older generation and the younger generation within an organization, and equally, there's Gen Z can, empathy is a skill that could be potentially a soft skill that could be developed and learned by everybody within the organization, so that there's almost a level playing field. So let's maybe get into that a bit now. So in terms of how that can be done, how people and leaders and people within an organization can learn to develop those sort of empathetic skills, what would you say would be a good place to start?
Um, a good place to start is what I would do is perhaps on a piece of paper, just write down a scales from 0 to 3 or 4.
Mm-hmm.
0 would be I don't want to learn. I know everything. 1
Right.
is I might. 2 is yes, I'm really curious. 3 is I want to be mastery of some skills that I want. Just write it to where you want to be, and from there to develop what you would like to do in the next year. So for
Yeah.
me, small skill sets, it's better than like one big one. So to create empathies for myself over the years, the first thing that I do is I would, before I go into a meeting or interact with anyone, I would just have a little reminder and say, let's breathe for 3 seconds. Or
Mm-hmm.
even in the calendar entry, just create that 5 minutes buffer before you go into the next meeting or next appointment. That really help.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's those little things that really affect how we think um, uh, cognitively. So that's why I want to do that first, and then once I have that buffer, and then I'll just basically go remind myself is what is my intention of having an interaction with this person? What
Mm-hmm.
is the result that I would like to get out of? That is not just for myself, but for other person. Because if it's just for myself, then you come with your own agenda only, and then if you don't hear it, you walk away. Then there's no collaboration, so not understanding where they're coming from. So I would actually think about how can I help this person, and what can I learn as well from this
Mm-hmm.
interaction. And then the next step would be when I go in, I would start having a relaxed facial expressions because the mirror neuron, our social brain, can interact, can affect other person. So I want to make sure that I'm on a neutral in facial expression, so this person don't feel that I'm threatening.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that is I'll start hearing first and come up with in my mind come up with a couple questions to ask if with the topic in mind,
Mm-hmm.
and then And then if I don't hear something that I don't want to hear, then I might actually take 3 deep breaths and then just do a little nod or just write it down, because then that would
Mm,
really help to discharge the negative feeling. If those negative feelings keep adding up, I won't be able to create um, heightened sense of listening to create to as an end result to create that empathy to understand where this person coming from. And so
mm.
that's what that's what I do. It's a small little step. I will just write it out, and then as you practice those small steps, just becomes kind of ingrained and natural as part of your you know interactions.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because, of course, and as you were talking there, it reminded me of a couple of things. One was that, yeah, you're absolutely right. There's that for some people, the ability to be empathetic can come quite naturally, but for some people, it might take a little bit of practice and might take a little bit of kind of dedicated time to really hone in on those skills. And I think what you've described there is a really great way to do that and really take that time to think about things. Also, something you mentioned earlier reminded me of some of a project I got involved with Impact, which you used the term a phrase sort of in someone else's shoes,
Hmm.
and that reminded me of a project that I got involved with through Impact, which is to work when we were working with a particular client who again wanted to highlight the need for empathy on a global scale. And the project was called In My Shoes. So we worked by the team would reach out to members of the organization, getting them to record themselves on their phones, answering questions of what it's like for them working in said organization. They would then
Great.
send their audio files to me. I'll edit them into various files, which was then played back to members on the program, leaders on the program, to experience what it was like for the people that they lead within their organization, albeit from around the world. So it might not be their direct reports, but that process suddenly highlighted the kind of, oh, I've not really thought about it from that perspective before, and triggered all of these sort of feelings and thoughts that really opened the minds of the leaders that were in that room. It was just a sort of amazing kind of a experience for them to go through to start really thinking outside of their own sphere, I suppose. Is
Yeah.
there anything else that you've done that has that similar, that you've worked in over the years, that has had that similar sort of result where it started to open people's minds a bit?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. As I'm listening to you, it reminds me of some of the impact clients that in programs that we're doing, and they kept saying that, well, we have no time. We need to get the result done. We need to get the result done. But
Mm,
if we were doing that too often, that was for me. That was a little sorry my directness. It's your own excuse not try to do something different,
yeah.
and being a leader to become being more empathetic, to become more understanding, to put yourself into the other person's shoes. Yes, it will take some effort. I acknowledge it, and it's just that if you train your brain to do it after 20 days of intentionally doing it, it just naturally become part of your habit, and it
Mm,
won't take that long. And we should think about is how to actually do it from our own perspective, that we can actually have that practice, and then
mm,
give us a little practice of getting it done. That would be really good to see that.
mm,
Lots of our clients with impact, when we did some experiential exercise of having them to do something, one of the feature one that's called Nigel. Um, when
mhm,
when they want to get things done, they really push and not understanding where everybody's coming from, and say you did everything wrong. And by
mm,
doing that, you could actually see the whole room, the energy just pulls out of from it. and
Mm.
because they want result focus too much. Um, Result will come if we can understand where pupils are coming from.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
McKinsey, from McKinsey and Korn Ferry, as well as Impact, when they did the research, they're all saying it's about human centric actions and behavior that as a leader
Sure.
can do that will create the empathy as well as the results. So lots we see it. Lots of people are focusing on result first,
Yeah.
then forgot about the human interaction.
Yeah. What a great way to finish that. I think there's it's a really powerful way, and you're absolutely right. There's that human-centered approach to leadership. Really, sort of empathy is a huge part of that. So thank you for sharing that thought, and also everything else that you've talked about on today's episode. It is we have reached the end of our episode, but I do have one question before I let you go, which is the same question we ask all of our guests. Bit more of a personal question, this one, so I hope you don't mind. And that is and you've probably heard or been around this question before, and this is to take a moment to look back on your own life and your own career, knowing what you know now. What advice would you give to your younger self?
I would say that is, don't jump into conclusions or focusing on result first, because that in itself really drove a lot of people away. And what I remember was when I was younger, starting out, I was very result driven,
Right.
and by doing that, you can alienate a lot of people. You might get acknowledgement from people above you, but then it's your peers and the people below you that support you to actually get to that point. So that's what I would give the advice to. It's like, don't be too cocky.
And I would, having met you very briefly, but I already can kind of feel this energy from you. But do you live by that advice now?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. I find myself doing a lot of short, taking short, quick breath when I'm interacting with a client or having a discussions with some of the colleagues that they might not agree with my view. Especially when people are English is not their first language, so they might use words differently than us, and then our interpretation is different. And for me, it's like, all right, hold on for a minute. So I need to actually breathe and then acknowledge it, and then find out a little bit more. So that's where I use to become kind of a circular loop to create breathe to get the energy, get the oxygen to a bigger brain, and then ask more clarifying questions so that I can create that empathy loop for myself to draw out what people need.
Brilliant. Amazing. Damiao, thank you ever so much for joining me and sharing your thoughts and experience today. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you ever so much for joining me. And that just leaves me to, thank you. It's been great. And that just leaves me to say, if you'd like to find out any more about Impact and the work that we do, or you want to connect with either myself or Damiao on LinkedIn, you'll find all of the links that you need in the description of where you found today's episode. So that just remains me to thank Damiao one more time for joining me today. Thank you, Damiao.
Thank you, Dad.
And until the next time, take care.